Welcome to the Industrial IoT Spotlight, your number one spot for insight from industrial IoT thought leaders who are transforming businesses today. With your host, Eric Walenza.
Welcome back to the Industrial IoT Spotlight podcast. I'm your host, Eric Walenza, CEO of IoT ONE, the consultancy that helps companies create value from data to accelerate growth. And our guests today are Charles Lefevre and Rafael Barros of Braincube. Braincube is an IIoT platform suite with business and expert apps designed for manufacturing. In this talk, we discuss digital transformation trends in the Latin American market. We also explored the common challenges associated with defining digitalization roadmaps in situations where the baseline maturity level is low, but the aspiration level is high. If you find these conversations valuable, please leave us a comment and a 5-star review. And if you'd like to share your company's story or recommend a speaker, please email us at team@iotone.com. Finally, if you have an IoT research, strategy, or training initiative that you'd like to discuss, you can email me directly at erik.walenza@iotone.com. Thank you.
Charles, Rafael, thank you for joining us on the podcast today.
Hi, Eric. Thanks to have us.
Thank you, Eric.
So this is going to be a little bit different from our typical podcast, just because we had your CEO, Laurent, on the podcast episode 117. I think this was about 2 months ago. And what that means is that we're not going to do really a deep dive on Braincube today. Again, if folks really want to learn more, I would encourage them to listen to 117. But instead, we're going to look at some of the challenges that you help your customers with around defining their digital transformation strategy, assessing their maturity level, and then defining the right solution, and with a particular focus on Latin America. So that's really interesting for me. I'm sitting here in Asia, so I have a pretty good view on APAC, and I'm really curious about maybe some of the similarities and differences between those markets. But before we jump into the conversation here, I'd love to just learn a little bit more about yourselves and how you joined Braincube and what kind of the scope of your work is. And then we can get into these topics. Charles, do you want to kick us off here?
Yes, sure. So as my name might indicate, I'm French. I've been in Brazil for probably 15 years. I stopped counting. After my engineering graduation, I went to Brazil. Loved the country, loved the culture. I've been working there since then. And I had the opportunity to know Braincube in, I think it was 2014, through a probably best friend of mine, Stefan, which is sales manager in Europe. And I had the opportunity to meet Laurent, Hélène, Braincube team. And I started as a sales executive at Braincube in 2015. So as the team has been growing, Braincube has been growing in LatAm since then, and now I'm sales manager and in charge with Rafael for the growth of the company and attending the industries in LatAm.
Great. And how about yourself, Rafael?
Well, different from Charles, I'm Brazilian. I'm working in Braincube for 5 years, and I met the company some time ago when I was working in a paper industry. I had the opportunity to understand the technology, and a few years later to be a part of the team.
Yeah, great. And you guys, I guess, are you working together? Are you in the same city, or is your organization centralized, or are you kind of working from home? I know Brazil is also quite a large country.
Well, after the pandemic, we are working for home most of the time. We gather some time at the office, but today I'm in Belo Horizonte and Charles is in São Paulo, so we're a little bit far away.
Yeah, I got it.
I think this pandemic allowed us to change the way of working. We used to be at the office most of the time, and now we meet one day a week to do meetings that we wouldn't do remotely. And so, yeah, we we had to adapt.
Yeah, I wonder how this works back in France, because I remember your headquarters is in this beautiful chateau in the French countryside somewhere. So I guess there you're one of the few countries where, or companies where people actually might want to be in the office.
Probably. we don't have the nice chateau, but we have the weather. At least I'm talking for myself as a French. In Brazil, it's like 50 weeks of summer a year. So also a nice place to be.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, my marketing manager's auntie is on a Greek island, right? So I always say she's dialing in from the beach, and then she puts on a fake Teams background to look professional. Let's get into the conversation here. I think there's a few topics we want to touch on. We were walking through the agenda before we kicked off here, and I'm thinking maybe it makes sense to flip it a little bit and start with just geographically, what does digital transformation and Industry 4.0 look like in Latin America today? Because that's actually the thing that I'm least familiar about. So it'll be useful if you can educate me and probably the audience around this, and then we can get into the topics of developing a digital transformation strategy and executing on that. But how do you look at Latin America? Obviously, it's a big region with probably a lot of difference in terms of maturity. But what is the way that you segment the region Latin America when you're thinking about what solutions might be a good fit where?
Yes, thinking about LatAm, as you said, is a very wide region, and you have a high diversity of kind of industries. You have international groups like, I don't know, paper industries, automotive industries, and you have regional groups, probably as strong as international. And I think due to this variety of origin of these groups, there is also a big variety of progress on the digital journey. So we talked about the 3.0 that started probably like 30, 40 years ago. And now the 4.0. What we can see here is very different needs from a company to another compared to what we can see when we discuss with our peers in Europe or America.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking what I know as an outsider of Latin America. What I think about Latin America, I think logistics. It seems like a region with very challenging logistics because of the kind of the odd shape of the region, right? You're in Central America, and then the rainforests and the mountains. So there's probably some challenging logistics environments. We just did a project in Brazil recently where we were talking about sugar factories and tomato factories that were kind of out in the areas where they didn't have great internet connectivity and where maybe hiring technical talent was challenging. What are some of the bigger challenges that you come across in that's just my impression, right? But what do you see when you're kind of trying to figure out how to execute on a digital transformation initiative?
If you think about LatAm, it's a region that really they're used to instability, economy, probably politics also. I understand that my perception coming to Brazil and knowing more LatAm, that they developed like a protection system. They are highly flexible. Industries and people are highly flexible here. So it's not necessarily a difficulty when you try to implement change. It's probably, I would say, their best asset when you try to implement a new methodology or new technologies like digital transformation.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting perspective. And that was actually my impression as well. So this project I mentioned, we were dealing with West Coast US, Brazil, Italy, and France, right? So 4 different regions. And the Brazilian team was the team I enjoyed working with the most because they were just super pragmatic. So I can see that. Within Latin America, are you primarily focused on Brazil, or what are the other markets where where are the other countries where you see a significant market for Industry 4.0?
So far, we've been focusing on Brazil because it's the biggest economy in LATAM, and also because it's easier for our office. We all speak Portuguese. And we have identified the last months, years, that there is some verticals of industries that are really driving LATAM economy, such as mining and steel industry. So we have been putting some efforts on helping these industries in LATAM, and we are seeing more opportunities and more way to help industries in like Peru, Chile, Argentina, where the steel industry is very strong.
Gotcha. And just to get one last piece of information as background here, when it comes to technical talent, especially on the IT side, What is the level that you're typically dealing with there?
On that topic, we noticed that in industry that are around big cities, we have a high level of maturity of people. But as Charles said, we have a wide region in Latin America, and the mills that are far away from the city centers, they struggle a lot with talent. So that's one of the biggest challenges regarding to people in industry. I would say not only IT, but even operation specialists, engineers, analysts.
Yeah, it makes sense. And also, I imagine a lot of the manufacturing in Latin America is outside of the cities because we're not necessarily talking about automotive. We're talking about resource processing, right? So that's kind of naturally going to be on the countryside. Okay, great. Well, I think this is then a good time to get into the conversation of how you actually work with companies. So maybe the first question here is when you're working with companies that they could be global, but then you're working with the regional team, or they could be a regional company. My assumption here is that you have to some extent, educate them along the way of what is their digital transformation strategy, or at least within a particular scope. How do they carve out an initiative and define that, and then how are they going to execute that? Because if they don't have that in place, then they're not going to be able to use Braincube's technology. So, how do you think through when you're working with customers? How do you think through what makes a effective digital transformation strategy, and then we can get into the execution topic. But first, just kind of looking at the strategic level, what do you see? And then maybe you can also point out, what do you see people commonly doing wrong when it comes to defining their DT strategy?
Yeah. As you said, we can work with global and regional groups. And I think that's one of the strengths of a company like Braincube, to have entities all over the world to be able to help to really establish a real partnership with multinational industries. And doing this, we can adapt to the local culture. And about what you said, I mean, what's the best way to start, or what to avoid? With Rafael, we try to simplify as much as possible. We notice that in LatAm, most industries are already studying digital transformations. They are studying use case from China, from USA, from Europe, and they think it's highly complicated. They think that they need to have big teams, to spend a lot of money. And the way we want to guide this with Rafael is to simplify as much as possible, and helping the company to focus on their business need, what makes them specific on the market. We are working with, I don't know, like cement companies or steel companies, paper companies. The very first start of the conversation is what makes you special, what makes you unique on the market and help you to differ from your competitors. And the next step would be, so, okay, how do you work on this day-to-day basis? What are your routines? Until we get to, okay, so what's the bottleneck? What prevents you to reach your goal? And we understood with Rafael that having this simple and pragmatic approach, we were able to discomplicate 4.0 digital transformation, to have successful implementation, successful adoption by users all over the plant, growing partnerships, I would say.
Well, just to quickly follow up on that, if we look at the two different large customer segments, right? So we have the multinational companies, and then we have the regional players. Where do you see decisions being driven from? Is it, and we can look at those separately, but does it tend to be coming from headquarters? Does it tend to be coming from the local factory? Is it kind of bottom up from maybe a production line engineer or manager who's has some budget to solve a particular problem? How do you see the decisions being made between these two big buckets of customers?
Eric, I see that the local mills, they have lots of power on the decision. So even with corporate customers that we work with, international rollouts, we always see that the local teams, they have a lot of knowledge from the technology, the mills and the market. So they are an important part to be considered in the implementation roadmap too.
And that's actually very interesting. We notice a big difference when for global rollout, or when we discuss with our colleagues in US or Europe, where decisions are easily made at quarter and then rolled out on the plants. In Brazil, at least in Brazil, I don't know for all the other countries in LatAm, but we very frequently see the opposite. I mean, we have to convince, for example, operational director or IT director about the need it has to evolve, to change. But it will sponsor the decision, but the first reflex will be to invite engineers, to final users to the meeting, so they can complement with their difficulty and what they need on the day-to-day basis. And I was positively surprised. I would say that we can see like a lot of meetings with an engineer or an operator discussing directly to a VP, for example, to say, okay, I like this solution because it helps me to control my process. It helps me to have holistic vision of the production. And then it's part of the decision process. I mean, it shakes all the hierarchy. I mean, you have operators and VPs and directors on the same level discussing about the need and deciding together about what to do.
Okay, yeah, very interesting, because I'm sitting here in China, and I'd say we have a very different culture here. So on the one hand, a lot of Chinese organizations are relatively strong because they're a large footprint, for the company. But what we see is typically headquarters will effectively kind of push tech rollout into China. That's starting to change a little bit now, but traditionally that's been the kind of the frame. And the local teams won't push back too much in meetings, so they'll kind of accept standardization on the tech stack. But then what will happen will be that there's going to be a lot of shadow IT, where people will accept that the technology is going to be rolled out, but they won't use it because it's probably not a good solution for the local needs. They'll just kind of on the side find some budget and build or buy a secondary solution and use that instead. And then you have this proliferation of shadow IT, because they don't want to kind of directly say, no, this solution is not going to work. So it's interesting how the cultures kind of play in here. I can imagine that Brazil is a bit more argumentative, certainly very communicative culture. So maybe it's easier in Brazil for teams to push back and communicate, how things need to be localized. Whereas in China, that's done a little bit. It's still done, right? But it's done a little bit more subtly, not necessarily directly, but just by kind of going around and finding solutions without necessarily telling headquarters about them.
And that was part of our learning process actually on the region, because Braincube is French. I have totally French thinking. I thought starting in Brazil that, okay, if a decision is made somewhere and someone wants to apply in Brazil or another country, it will happen. We learned the hard way. Fortunately, we learned it fast, but that's not the way it's working here. So now it's really part of our process to create the good conditions for adoption. And if you think about adoptions, it's the end users, it's the engineers, the operator, the coordinator. I mean, it's depending on how they want to be or how want to make decision on day-to-day basis. And it's now part of our process.
And Charles, I see that's a key point for us to have like local people here in Latin America to understand the customer needs here, because not every time they will speak back to corporate and argue about the solution. So it's really important to have a local team that understand the local culture, to be able to help them and discuss those subjects with corporate, so that the solution can work in a long time.
That made me think, Eric, I wanted to ask you actually, how is it in China? Because I told earlier that LatAm is used to instability, so they're used to change very fast and very easily. So it's part of their strategy also and culture. Is that the same in China? I mean, does the strategy tends to change frequently?
So yes and no. I think on the one hand, China has had a tremendous amount of change just because of the very strong GDP growth. So there's been this culture or this environment of constant growth for 30 years. And that's created a certain unique dynamic where every year it's okay, we've got to hit a 15%, 20% growth target for our China business. And you can imagine that creates a certain type of culture where it's just put more capacity in. That's changing right now, but that forced you to react very quickly and to change very quickly. And of course, Chinese businesses epitomize that, right? So you have all of these companies that are pivoting into completely new industries, right? You have airlines that are becoming real estate companies and so forth because they're identifying opportunities and then they're just trying to jump on those opportunities as quickly as possible before somebody else takes the market. So there is that very strong dynamic of growth. On the other hand, you traditionally have more of a top-down, market, especially among the state-owned enterprises, where a lot of the decisions are being driven by kind of a small group at the top, and then that, is kind of counter to change. You also have, I think, in a lot of corporates, a fairly strong headquarters presence, and now headquarters, they are trying to localize more and put more decision making in the China subsidiaries, but that's a relatively new trend. I guess yes and no. I think it's probably somewhat different than Brazil, but there are some, let's say, a mixed bag when it comes to this topic. Let's get into this topic of maturity. I think that's probably an area where there's some similarities. I mean, China also is a very diverse market with kind of world-class factories in some areas, and then a lot of kind of industry 0.02 factories. And when I was speaking with Laurent, we were focused more, I think, on the more cutting-edge solutions that Braincube is bringing to market. But I know that you also do things that are more suited for companies that are a bit less mature. So maybe we can get into those use cases a bit. But maybe a starting point is, how do you, when you're first engaging with a customer, how do you assess their maturity and then assess what solution might be right? Because I guess maturity can be, there's different axes, right? You could look at it in terms of their machine connectivity. You could look at it in terms of their Lean Six Sigma processes, their IT backbone, et cetera. So what are the critical variables for you when you're assessing what the maturity of a factory or of a company is?
Eric, about maturity, I think we should look at two different points. The first one is technology. So how prepared the customer is regarding technology, about connectivity, the system that are running, how those systems talk with each other, and those kind of things. And the other point that's really important too, it's about the people maturity regarding data. And that's something that we work a lot here in Latin America. The first phase of the assessment with the customer, we really deep dive into their culture to understand how they use data today, what they are expecting to use their data, and joining those 2 points, technology and people maturity, we start to build with them the roadmap of digital transformation. So I think one of the important points to consider to have a successful digital transformation is to address the correct solution to the moment. So sometimes the customer is really eager to adopt advanced technologies, but in our roadmap building process, we always have this approach. How it's the people maturity, how is the technology maturity, and what can we provide right now. And as the customer evolves, we evolve with the customer and can provide more advanced technologies.
I think that's exactly it. When we consider the 4 pillars of digital transformation, technology, people, I would say strategy first, but strategy, technology, people, and data, there is this sexy side of autonomous machine learning, neural networks, etc. And the assessment we do as a company is, okay, it's a journey. The partnership with us or with other companies will last years. The matter is how to help you to get results fast. And that's why we really try to understand as in the best possible way the days are working today. Because if you implement big change on the routines between Friday and Monday, on Monday everybody will be lost. So it needs to be a very subtle change at the start if you want to have good adoption. And and then adapt on the roadmap as they advance in their journey. And usually what we see here in LatAm for the first kind of usage of IoT platform is access to data. I mean, be able to access data from any plants, anywhere, anytime, and be able to take decision. It's really the first big value of the IoT is breaking silos.
So I'm interested in understanding more your process of road mapping, because there's always this tension where on the one hand you want to establish a more long-term vision, so you have some clarity around where the organization is going towards. On the other hand, there's going to be a lot of learning along the way, and so you need to be able to evolve probably quite significantly. And so there's always that kind of tension of how much structure versus flexibility you want to have in the roadmap. Maybe it would be useful if we can think of one example of a customer that you're working with, and you can, of course, anonymize the name, but just so that you have kind of a clear example in mind, and kind of walk us through, what did you first do for them? What was step number one, and then how did the roadmap evolve, and maybe where are you today? Is there a customer that you could refer to? And again, feel free to anonymize it.
I have a really good customer in mind. It's one big cement group here in Brazil. In the beginning, with that customer, we try to understand the needs. So the customer asks us for technology, for advanced analytics, artificial intelligence, and all of these, the technologies that everyone is using today. And the first step in the roadmap that we build is data access. So although they already have had access to their data, it was not in a structured way. So the first step we built with them was, let's say, a simple virtual twin that was able to communicate with all the mills, with all the process, and structure that data in a way that all the engineers and analysts could use the data to understand the process. After they achieve that level in technology, and we work with them for them to achieve that level in people's maturity toward data too, it took maybe 6 months for them to achieve that level. Then we built the next step that was focused on how to use that data to make analysis. So how can they be proactive about their process? How can they understand the factors that made the furnace stop or that contribute to a low quality during the day? And in that stage, the people's maturity is more important than the technology itself. So it was clear for us that we were working with, maybe 5 or 6 mills in that time. And was clear for us that 3 mills had more mature engineers, and they were able to build advanced solutions using the apps that we provide to work with data. But one important point of working with big groups in the same platform is the ability to get what one mill is doing in a really good way and to roll out that solution to the other mills. So even in groups that you have different maturities around the mills, using the same platform, using the same data structuration, the customer is able to quickly reply that results, that apps, dashboard or analysis that was executed in one mill to all the other mills in the group. So in the end, you end up increasing the people's maturity toward data. And again, talking about technology, that customer is really focused on using artificial intelligence and advanced analytics in all of their mills. But we are in the middle of the roadmap, and building step by step, we can grant the customer that they're having a constant value from the solution, and they can evolve in a long term with us.
What are the timelines here? Are we talking about between these different iterations? Are we talking about 6 months, 12 months, 24 months?
Well, it really varies depending on the customer. But in that case specifically, the first step took 6 months to implement the technology, to train and consult the teams to achieve that point. And then the second stage, I would say it took 3 months to some of the more advanced mills. And to reply that solution to the other mills, it took 3 months more. So we're talking about a huge, how can I say, a huge roadmap, let's say like this, that was able to be executed in 1 year. And we're talking about sustainable results. So it's really important to take the time that's needed by each mill.
Gotcha. And I'm always curious how organizationally these are structured. So was this led by like a central team under the CIO or the VP of engineering, or was it kind of led by separate teams, each mill having their own team and then them kind of coordinating together? What was the organizational structure on the customer side?
Well, to achieve sustainable results, it's necessary to have the high management engaged on this. So it's really important to have the CIO and the COO really engaged on the process, follow up the results, understanding how the teams are evolving and developing solutions. In that case specifically, we managed to build some culture workshops that was some meetings, some online meetings with all the mills, the CEO, the CIO, the COO, all the high management, where all the end users were able to show and to share for everyone what they were developing, which results they were achieving. And although it's a simple point, it was really important to build the data culture in the company. So having all the high management involved and having the team, actually bringing the team the opportunity to share what they are doing regarding data to the high management level, we notice in all of these years that's one really important engagement point for the team.
And what's interesting is focusing on the sustainability, because that's what we want for our partners. The key point is respecting customer pace. And you told Eric about human organization, how they're organized to do this. In this specific case of a cement industry in Brazil, the VP of operation asked us to go slow. I mean, he wanted success. He didn't want to go fast or to lose money. If I want success, so let's go slow, step by step. And actually, so we were expecting a long journey, and that's perfect, totally perfect for us. But actually, since they had this corporate organization with corporate engineers and engagement of executive level, they were able to move very fast. And we were surprised that in less than a year, they had all their Brazilian mill covered and using Braincube to leverage their data.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. And cement industry is not one of the industries that you typically think of as, a front mover on this topic. So, yeah, very interesting that they're really prioritizing this. What else should we touch on here? There's one topic that I'm just personally interested in, so maybe I can quickly pick your brain on this, which is the topic of sustainability, right? So this is this is obviously a very important topic around the world, but I think in Brazil, it's also quite a strong topic right now. And it's, I think, quite related to the topic of digital transformation. If you look at a cement mill, for example, there's a lot of energy consumption there. And probably the data analytics that you're enabling can also support them when they're trying to achieve sustainability targets. What have you seen in Brazil around this topic? Has this become a priority for your customers? Are you supporting projects, or do you see this as still maybe a like number 3 priority behind maybe more cost and efficiency?
With all these ESG trends around the world, we notice that the companies are looking for it, not only for the sustainability thing, for the environment thing, but actually to be able to receive some funds for external companies. We noticed this during the last 2 years that a lot of investors are focusing more and more in companies that are ESG compliant. So that's a big trend here in Brazil for companies that are trying to adapt not only to Brazilian standards, but to global standards to be able to access these funds, to be able to grow with these funds. So that's a really hot topic right now. We are working with a lot of energy consumption, environmental things that, I don't know, 5 years ago, almost no one was focusing technology and analysis on this. Today, we see a big trend around all the types of industries.
What's interesting here in LatAm is that, and I remember being surprised by it, but the industries have a lot of power. If you look on the global scale, politically, Brazil wants to be sustainable, but it's hard for them to take this decision. But we see, as Rafael said, the industry is taking the step and really wanting to be more sustainable, that they need to just to respect laws. We have steel industries. I think maybe you can recall other example, Rafael, but I remember a specific case of steel industries really monitoring their emission and really trying to get to the zero carbon. So trying to compensate anyway from a way or another to be as green as possible.
Another really good example that we have is on the cement industry, where you need to be able to mix your raw products to produce high quality cement. But at the same time, you end up producing some gases on this. So we have a really tight legislation on this. More and more, the companies are trying to understand their data, understand the impact of adding a different material, on how this will impact the cement quality and the production of gases too.
We have these resources internally that we call it the digital twin. It's a way to aggregate the data in a way that it makes sense for the customer to take decisions. And I remember this example of a customer that needed to understand what product was polluting the less, and then understand what were the conditions happening in this process that it was polluting less. So mix of raw materials, process conditions, like for example temperature and speed and stuff like that. So this is really a matter of having the mean to reach it, having a holistic vision of your process and also specific apps to be able to monitor your pollution and be able to know what's happening in your process and avoid the unwanted conditions.
Great. So last topic or last question that I wanted to touch on here is how you address kind of volatility or change, right? So you mentioned that LatAm is a region where you need to be very flexible. I think the same is to an extent true here in APAC. So how do you enable this? What are the tools that you're providing customers with that allow them to be more flexible in how they deploy technology?
Well, that's a really good question, Eric. In our technology evolution during all of these years, we started noticing that people want to be more autonomous on their solution. So today we have a lot of apps like low code, no code apps and dashboards that all of the engineers, the analysts, the operators, everyone on the shop floor to build their own solution, to see data, to analyze data, to build their own solution with a high level of autonomy so they can adapt themselves really quickly and not necessarily ask for us to build something different for them that will take some weeks. So with these low code, no code apps that we have, mainly the engineers today are able to build their own solution in a matter of some minutes or maybe hours to take some decisions and to act in their processes.
Yeah, I think that's a really important trend just for the industry as a whole, so that we can get away from the typical IT bottleneck or system integrator bottleneck to get new tech out. What are some of the more common or maybe more interesting tools that you've seen people build?
People are really creative. Open environments like the ones that Braincube provides. We saw engineers doing all kind of things. Like one of the most impressive I saw was on the cement industry. one engineer built a correlation graph that showed to the operators how the furnace is deviating, so they can act with like 3 hours in advance to prevent the furnace to stop. And it was not building some, I don't know, advanced analytics algorithm, not like this. It was like in a basic graph environment, use some correlations, and he was able to build that tool totally alone and provide this initially for one mill, and then he rolled out these for other mills that faced the same issue. And I think that's one important point. When you structure the data in a really good way, you provide the end users the ability to be creative and to build their own solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is a very good point also, that it doesn't need to be fancy or beautiful, right? It just needs to do the job, and it needs to be to some extent affordable and quick and flexible, right? So
adaptable scenario, you need to be quick, not to be, let's say, fancy or beautiful. You need to be quick and assertive.
Yeah, great. Well, guys, I think we've covered a good amount of territory here. Anything that we didn't touch on that you want to cover today?
I don't think so. I mean, we had some other ideas, but they're really far away. I think we covered what we want, what we needed.
Yeah, great. Well, I know you guys are waiting to get back to the beach, so I won't hold you. But really, thanks for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much for your time and patience. And I hope it will sound good. Sound good.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you very much for the opportunity, Eric.
Thanks for tuning into another edition of the IoT Spotlight podcast. If you find these conversations valuable, please leave us a comment and a 5-star review. And if you'd like to share your company's story or recommend a speaker, please email us at team@iotone.com. Finally, if you have an IoT research, strategy, or training initiative that you would like to discuss, you can email me directly at erik.walenza@iotone.com. Thank you.